Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today, let's talk about Star Wars and religion. Yes, this is probably going to be slightly controversial. So there's this idea floating around the internet a lot recently that the Jedi are supposed to represent the morality of the United States or even religious institutions, including various Christian denominations. This observation is usually paired with comments about how the recent Disney Star Wars shows are attempting to portray the Jedi as a less than perfect organization as a way to attack said values. I know that's a lot to unpack, especially for people who are unfamiliar with this conversation. But you know, Star Wars is one of the largest fictional franchises in the world, and there's tons of content and source materials, myths buried into the lore that can be interpreted in every which way, leading to conclusions that people needed to make. I admit I do this on my channel a lot. If you guys have been following me for a long time, and by that I mean like for years, you'll know that we went from being a more silly channel that just talked about ships and big weapons to still like a really goofy ass channel, but one that tries to have deeper conversations about what Star Wars means and how it can relate to the real world. This honestly was just a reaction to what I feel like is a downward spiral in social media content in general. Like, not to get on a high horse, I know I'm just doing Star Wars lore, but I would argue what I'm trying to do here also falls in line with the spirit of what George Lucas kind of wanted from Star Wars, except for the parts where I like advocate for the consumption of porgs and Ewoks. I'm just hungry sometimes when I write these scripts, man.
Anybody in the media has a very large megaphone that they can reach a lot of different people. And so whatever they say, whatever they do, however they conduct themselves, whatever they produce has an influence and is teaching somebody something.
So this interview, which I'm going to be referencing a lot from George Lucas, was done before the social media age. It took place in 1999, just a month before the release of The Phantom Menace. And this interview actually gives us a lot of insight into what George Lucas was thinking when he created Star Wars. The title of the program is like the Mythology of Star Wars, so you kind of know what he's going to be talking about here.
What do you make of the fact that so many people have interpreted Star Wars as being profoundly religious?
So the interviewer is Bill Moyer, who's a pretty famous PBS journalist who just retired pretty recently. He's a pretty left-leaning guy, but I've always appreciated his tendency to reach across the aisle and have meaningful and respectful conversations with conservatives. I really feel like we'll live in a healthier world if we're more like Bill Moyer when we realize that we shouldn't listen to people based on their political affiliations, but based on if they have interesting things to say and if they're good intentioned with what they say. And I swear to God, if you try to live life in this way, it'll really broaden your mind to what's available in the world. It'll make your life a lot richer, and you'll also get less angry. I mean, the anger completely dissipates once you start realizing that most people are just kind of normal and doing their own thing. But first, you gotta, purge your political biases, which can be really hard. But anyway, Bill Moyer actually studied theology as a young man and was a Baptist pastor, which kind of makes him perfect for this interview. I also think his religious background adds a lot of moral clarity to his work and behavior as a journalist.
I don't see Star Wars as profoundly religious. I see Star Wars as taking all of the issues that religion represents and trying to distill them down into a more modern, more easily accessible construct that people can grab onto to accept the fact that there is a greater mystery out there.
Religion in the modern world, especially in the West, has been at a crossroad for quite some time now. Most religious groups are facing a huge decline in membership. There's a lot of things that compete with religion today. Back in the day, you could either go to church or like play with sticks and rocks. There wasn't that much competition. And I think a lot of religious leaders, religious institutions today are trying to be more flexible with their doctrine and more open-minded in how they approach kind of recruiting people to their faiths. I mean, there are LGBT-friendly churches in many Christian denominations now. You have female rabbis and even prosperity gurus who want you to help fund his awesome Gulfstream jet. If you have a true understanding of Judeo-Christian scriptures, well, heck, I'm not even Christian or religious. If you just have an understanding of basic morality, you'll know that two of those things in Judeo-Christian scriptures are like minor infractions at best, and one of those things is the fucking Antichrist. Yeah, in today's world, it's harder for religions to survive because you have the internet. You can look up stuff like scandals. I think people, believe it or not, are taught to be more independent-minded and to think for themselves to a certain degree. I know we always criticize how there's less critical thinking, but in the longer span of human history, we're doing better than we used to. And if you take a look at someone like George Lucas from a very young age, well, he questioned the orthodoxy.
When I was 10 years old, I asked my mother, I said, well, there's only one God. Why are there so many religions?
As Lucas grew older and his forays into becoming a race car driver failed, he started actually focusing more on anthropology, the study of man and society. And at one point before he found cinema, that was actually like his path in life. George had a natural love and curiosity for humanity. This made him an avid reader and explorer of many different cultures and religions. I believe that George's greatest strength as a filmmaker is not his directing or writing, obviously. It's not even his cinematography and production skills, which were always phenomenal. But instead, it's his world building and imagination. And I think he owes a lot of this to his understanding of different human societies and cultures and how human societies are built. That allows him to make this galaxy far, far away feel and look so alien, but at the same time feel so familiar. But more importantly, I think anthropology taught George Lucas that in every culture, in every society, every civilization, there are always ideas that kind of kept society together, that made sure that people didn't just kill each other and eat each other. George Lucas realized for there to be a safe and stable society, you really needed a shared belief system.
When I was 10 years old, I asked my mother, I said, well, there's only one God. Why are there so many religions? And it would seem to me that the conclusion I've come to is that all the religions are true. They just see a different part of the elephant.
Now, Lucas is not what I would call a religious person. He's more spiritual. I've heard him call himself a Buddhist Methodist, which, I think was just something he made up. But the idea is, I think he sees values in a lot of different belief systems. But he's also against institutions, as many, artists and directors were in his generation. And you can see it in Star Wars. No institution escapes criticism, not even the Holy Jedi Order. But as an amateur anthropologist, I think he begrudgingly understood how important religion is. He wasn't someone who hated religion. I mean, he saw the flaws in, I guess, the structure of religion and how individual actors in that structure can do bad things. But as a whole, he saw religion as a positive force.
Religion is basically a container for faith. Faith is the glue that holds us together as a society. Faith in our culture, our world, our whatever it is that we're trying to hang on to, is a very important part of I think allowing us to remain stable, remain balanced.
So, the people out there who say that, Star Wars is all about American values or Christian values, they're actually not exactly wrong. What they're doing is just attaching their own belief systems to Star Wars, which is fine because in a lot of ways, I think that's how George Lucas designed it. It's just like there's not a monopoly over who gets to say what Star Wars is about or who it's for. It's kind of out there for everyone.
Almost every single religion took Star Wars and used it as an example of their religion. And we're able to relate it to young people and saying this is what, and relate the stories specifically to the Bible and relate stories to the Quran and the Torah and things. And so it's like, if it's a tool that can be used to make old stories be new and relate to younger people, that's what the whole point was.
And so as you can see, George Lucas always meant for this franchise to be something even more inclusive. So it's not just for Christians, it's not just for Americans, obviously. This is a modern myth that is designed for modern people who might need some guidance, some hope and faith in their life. And the beauty of Star Wars is that the text, the actual meat of the mythology, is there for everyone to interpret. I mean, George Lucas was greatly influenced by the American writer Joseph Campbell.
My last mentor probably was
Joseph Campbell.
Joe Campbell, who asked a lot of the interesting questions and exposed me to a lot of things that made me very interested in a lot more of the cosmic questions and the mystery.
Joseph Campbell wrote the book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. This is a deep analysis of the hero's journey that is found time and time again in various cultures all around the world in different ages. I like to call such mythology cultural technology, stories with values that are designed to perpetuate society's gains, pass down good values so we don't, kill each other and destroy civilization. Campbell and Lucas both believe that, the hero's journey, these myths need to be passed on and retold in every generation or else society will kind of just descend into chaos. And George Lucas, well, he designed Star Wars at its core to discuss the moral and political issues of his day. The original trilogy was a commentary against fascism, authoritarian dictatorships. George was a boomer, and like a lot of boomers, he got a lot of hate from his parents' generation, the greatest generation. They would say things like, well, we killed Hitler and, defeated Tojo. What the hell are you doing with your life, you bunch of dirty hippies? And the funny thing is, like, the boomers, they say the same exact things to us millennials. Hopefully, as a millennial, our generation can, break this cycle of stupidity and actually try to nurture and help the younger generations, because if they fail, if they become pussies or useless, well, that's because we built the world that they're living in, Anyway, the Battle of Endor at the end of the original trilogy was a direct criticism of America's war in Vietnam, driven by the fear of the domino effect of communism. We never realized that Vietnamese communism was very different from Russian communism, and also, Vietnamese people could eat lead and make anti-tank mines out of rocks and sticks and just shouldn't have been f***ed with. And then you have the prequels from George Lucas, which were a warning about how the Republic can quickly backpedal and become a dictatorship. And Episode 2 and Episode 3 eerily matched America's poorly planned and destructive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which really hurt the entire world and hurt the United States. In hindsight, it left tens of thousands of our bravest and most courageous men and women in really messed up situations. It ruined decades of hard-won goodwill we had with the world. We also wasted future generations' money and, resources that could have been used for much better things. We got Homeland Security, the TSA, and MRAPs for local SWAT teams instead of healthcare, affordable insulin, and shared-use small arms stations. That's the political aspect of Star Wars. It's always been there. I don't understand why people get upset about it. Just because the political messages, the political battles have changed, doesn't mean they're any less valid. Star Wars has always been a bellwether for what's happening in the world. And look, I'm sure you guys are tired of me talking about my allegiance to democracy, to the Republic, and also my insistence that checks and balances are important, even for the Holy Jedi Order. But in my opinion, this is probably the most noble, important part of the Star Wars franchise. It's the lessons it can teach the viewers, the inspiration it can give us. I feel like that's a lot more meaningful than just the tanks and lightsaber battles. Those things are cool too. I like talking about those things, but yeah, art is supposed to do more, right? Then there's also the moral values of Star Wars, which do actually share a lot of links to traditional religion. So, if a pastor wants to do a sermon with Luke Skywalker as the pivot point, awesome, go for it. If a freedom fighter on the front lines of some battlefield wants to paint a rebel logo on their helmet, go for it. That's what it's for. A lot of people ask me, Alan, why are you even covering the Acolyte? How come you're not being critical of this show? My answer is well, look, man, you can take a look at all my early reviews of the sequel, of the Disney Plus shows. I'm kind of critical in all of my reviews. I'm actually critical of the Acolyte. If you actually watched my videos, I point out problems, but I always maintain a level of respect. I think people mistake being outraged and emotional with critiquing, because critiquing is not necessarily about your emotions. Because over the years I realized that Star Wars means so much for so many different groups of people. And while I'll talk about things that I don't like, I usually keep my personal biases, the strongest ones, and my strongest emotions out of it, And it's not easy. I'm a very emotional, chaotic person normally. But again, Star Wars is not just for me. We have to share it as a community. And when I give my final review of shows, I often give a more critical, technical review where I do talk about story dialogue, themes, cinematography. I did study film in college. And in all honesty, I find film critiquing as one of the more egotistical and just kind of useless professions. It's personal opinion, of course. I understand that it is important to try and be objective in reviewing films, and I have critics that I like. But I'm so tired of people who try to argue that they have the most objective review or the best review, because I feel like that's a really smooth-brained, egotistical way of looking at things, and I think people who think in this manner don't really understand what the real purpose for entertainment and art is. Most people don't care or necessarily benefit from a breakdown of the technical aspects of a film or writing. It's just nerds who really like cinema, like me, maybe. This is why there are 20 Fast and Furious films and 20 other movies that are sequels, prequels based on books and or real people. It's always kind of been like this. I mean, the movie industry is an industry. It's a business. And what seems to work are things like this, entertaining films where people have previous connections to, I'm not saying that's like a great thing, but this is just how the industry is. And Star Wars is also in some ways junk entertainment. But unlike a lot of these other shows, it actually has elements of this modern mythology that George Lucas has created. And honestly, Disney has done kind of a meh job at continuing. Like, this is actually my biggest criticism of Disney. A lot of their new shows, the sequels, either have convoluted, not well executed themes or values in them, or they have no values at all. I mean, this is the worst crime that Disney can do, in my opinion, because what makes this franchise valuable is the political and moral messages that you can deliver through Star Wars. I mean, yes, I love the lore, I love the world building, but to see an actual movie do good to inspire people to be the best version of themselves, I really dig that. And so for people who ask me, how could you enjoy The Acolyte? Well, just take a look at my review of Yord, or my many breakdowns of the problems of the checks and balances of the Jedi. You'll see why I enjoy parts of this show. If you guys want my actual critics review of The Acolyte, well, first, wait until the end of the show. Again, I tell you, I can't review a show until I see the whole fucking thing. But I also want to say, I don't think Star Wars films and TV shows are high-level cinema. A New Hope was groundbreaking from a technical standpoint. Empire was a masterpiece and was super focused and thematic, but it still had like space opera-esque dialogue. It was less campy than other Star Wars films, but it's still campy. I think even Andor, which is by far one of the best Star Wars TV shows ever made, is at best maybe like an 8.5. Like, there are better shows out there, I'll admit it. Like, there are shows with better pacing, with better dialogue, more focused themes, just all around excellence. You know, Andor is a great show, and that's because Star Wars shows are incredibly difficult to make. I mean, there's so much baggage in the Star Wars universe. It's seriously impressive that they were able to convince someone like Tony Gilroy to get into this story and actually give it a shot. And I'm not surprised at all that Tony Gilroy, wasn't even a fan of Star Wars when he made Andor, because honestly, that's what it takes to make a good movie. You can't worship the source material. You can't be afraid to make awesome decisions. That's why I'm so frustrated by fans who want exactly the same lore and the same stories. I'm frustrated by fans who don't actually know what they want, and yet they keep getting disappointed when exactly what they asked for gets delivered directly to them. I mean, it's like doing drugs, guys. A lot of people, I feel like a lot of Star Wars fans are chasing nostalgia the first time they saw Star Wars, and the truth is, you will never get that feeling again. And we see it with attempts to make films like The Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi, Ahsoka. Any attempt to recreate that same feeling will end up in failure. And more importantly, if we continue acting like literal children in our criticisms of Star Wars, and not actually making good faith arguments, and not making constructive criticism, which a lot of people are, by the way, a lot of people are, but clearly, the rational voices have been completely drowned out. And, this is going to be the result. This is what's going to happen.
You go to make a movie and all you do is get criticized, and people try to make decisions about what you're going to do before you do it. It's not much fun, and you can't experiment. You can't do anything. You have to do it a certain way.
You've seen the interviews of George Lucas before the prequels came out, how philosophical he was. Well, that interview is what happens after he endured about a decade and a half of abuse for what fans didn't like about the prequels. Kind of sucks.